This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Hayden Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Hayden's iPhone, Seth Tower Hurd.
It's the consultant and this is Hayden Shaw. He's worked with companies like Hilton Hotels, NASA, Department of Defense, and World Vision on the nonprofit side. My name is Seth Tower Hurd. I run Digital Profit Farm, which helps companies solve their website, social media, and podcasting issues to make more money. And I can't even say the name of the show because apparently this is like a new corporate thing that we're not supposed to use the word. That's actually half of the title of the podcast.
The M word, millennial. So that's one of the trends that's happening now. And kind of 5 different categories of reluctance around the millennial word. So I think it's worth talking about since it's built in the title, and you is one, and I spawned 4 of them. So it's probably worth talking about. How do you be sensitive to the millennial topic? How do you be sensitive to people's reluctance to use the millennial word and everything that comes with that and the baggage that that word has? And then what do we do with the fact that we need some way to talk about a group of people who have significantly different characteristics and can be puzzling to other groups of people if we don't use the M word?
Let me ask a question before we get right into that.
Yeah.
I'm what I refer to as an elder millennial, gray-haired millennial. At least we've been called that because I'm 35.
And the irony is you got no gray in your beard and you got no hair. So you probably need something other than gray hair for that.
So, I have seen on social media those of kind of about a 3 or 4 year window around me that said, well, we didn't grow up with the internet the whole time. We can remember life without the internet. So therefore we are a sub-generation because we're not Generation Xers. And yeah, we didn't have the
smartphone, especially. We didn't have the smartphone. We didn't grow up with that.
Yes. I mean, I didn't get dial-up internet till maybe late junior high, somewhere in there.
Well, you did live on the edge of civilization, farm boy.
Okay, so there's that, right?
No wonder you went into, I never thought of this. No wonder you went into digital marketing. You're like, like Jack Nicholson in that horrible Batman movie. The toys. You're like, finally, internet comes to the farm, the digital profit farm.
Okay, so do you actually believe this? This whole there's like a little mini sub-generation. I mean, it's kind of semantics in some ways, but we might as well. I asked the question, so I guess
it is semantics. But we live in a world where semantics can make people feel uncomfortable, and semantics are loaded. And never have we lived in a world that was more loaded. And frankly, never has there been more frustrations over words. So part of what I want to talk about is how do the older generations respond to this, and how can millennials navigate the fact that many of them find the word millennial to be a burden to bear. And at the same time, when they make too much of a deal about it, it actually plays right into the expectations and frustrations of other generations that they're trying to avoid. I just saw it again this week with better graphics. Somebody is using illegal photos now. In that, there was young people, 18-year-olds and whatever, on the beach of Normandy, Storm Normandy. These 18-year-olds, and it showed a rally. Can't be, don't want to be offended, don't want to be stressed, have PSTD for hearing that no one's coming to their birthday. And so, it's kind of the snowflake thought police kind of college campus. And melting pot is a microaggressive word. That whole kind of era. And so that's a huge issue in our society right now between the generations that will only widen. And so it's a hard time to be a millennial to navigate through that. And it's actually a hard time to be a millennial's manager or a friend, colleague.
Okay. So you didn't exactly come down somewhere. So whether or not,
but let me answer your question about microgroups. Yes, there are yes, the answer is yes, words matter. And yes, there are subgroups within the category. You can look at subgroups 3 different ways. First of all, there's always a first wave and a second wave. So baby boomers had a first wave. They listened to the Beach Boys. The second wave was at the very end where, Beach Boys did not describe your experience of the world. Sex Pistols may not have described your experience of the world, but Beach Boys certainly did not describe your experience of the world. It was much closer to the Gen X, much more cynical. So Gen Xers had that first wave, and then you have the second half, a second wave is what I call it in the book, of Gen Xers who were much more optimistic, like the millennials. And then you have now the first wave of millennials who had pre-recession and pre-smartphones, and then the second wave of millennials who, and for example, the research shows, Pew Research discovered that the first wave of millennials still consider email a form of communication, and the second half of millennials did not list email as one of the forms of communication. And so there's differences between in a 20-year span of time, 17-year span of time, there's going to be differences closer you get to the new generation. So younger millennials now are going to be a lot more like Gen Z, which, as you know from previous recordings, I hate that name. But that's what that name is, kind of temporarily what we're using. Anyway, so yes, there are subgroupings throughout all of the generations, and some experts call 10 different generations, and that's just too many for people. It's kind of like the Myers-Briggs, 16 categories, and you're like, no, wait, you're a what? Just 4 different groups, learn the basics, raise your generation like you, so you don't suck as much as you interact with other people.
Okay. By the way, I legitimately was a Hayden Shaw fan before we started doing this. I was a Hayden Shaw fan, and then I helped him with the second book launch, and then the podcast was born many, 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 many months after I first suggested it, because he didn't
mainly because I won't
good.
write stuff.
Yes. I said you had to do something to get your name out there more, and you won't write articles, even though you could write articles in really big publications. You just won't do it. So here we are.
I do hate writing.
But I do want to say, even though he hated writing it, Sticking Points, Hayden's first book, is something that absolutely everybody ought to read. It is the 12 something something something, and the something where they come together. Hayden Shaw, Haydn, on Amazon or wherever you buy books.
Seth is not a huge fan of the subtitle. How to get the 4 generations working together in the 12 places they come apart. Possibly the longest subtitle in the history of publishing.
I would have just done like different book jackets. This is a weird episode, but hang in there. We're getting to the really good stuff. I would have done different, there's like different magazine covers sometimes. I would have done like 4 different book jackets, and one of them would have been like why Gen Xers are idiots and how to fix them, why baby boomers are lame and how to fix them, and why millennials are lazy and how to fire them.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. That's actually not a bad idea at all.
Okay. We're back on track here. Organizations do not want to use the word millennial, and all of a sudden we're dancing on the line, honestly, with politics, not as far as Democrat, Republican, but as far as how people describe themselves and see themselves, and what is and is not offensive, right? So yeah. Using the word millennial at work is now a trigger word, kind of.
Well, a trigger word's probably, I don't know. I've had some groups where it's been a trigger word. So let's unpack it. 5 things, and I'm going into some depth on this in some of the postings I started to do on LinkedIn, because this man said, write something, create some content. So our closed Facebook group, join it for consultant in the millennial, and I'm putting something up almost every week. In some airport, I'm usually recording something. I try to wait until I'm in a button-down shirt instead of what I work in my office, T-shirt and stuff. I try to actually look decent, but so it's usually in an airport. And then I'm also now starting to post on LinkedIn. I'm going to do a series on how do we navigate this. But so we're giving you kind of the inside scoop on all of that. 5 reasons why organizations are cautious about it. Number 1, doesn't happen much, especially out in Silicon Valley, out on the West Coast. We're beginning to hear companies say, we don't do anything with a millennial in it. We don't even want to use the word. So if it's got millennial in it, we won't do it. Likened to that are the millennials who are like, seriously? The millennial word has so much baggage. There's so much hate, like the meme I just mentioned on Facebook. There's so much hate about millennials. There's so much bashing of millennials. Just in the last week, there's that meme, and then another millennial interview meme that makes fun of, and then that's a parody of millennials interviewing. And so many professional millennials, so many responsible millennials like Seth, for example, they look at that and go, really? Really? I've had a number of millennials say to me, I've spent the last 3 years trying to distance myself from the title millennial. I wanted to learn in this class, but really. So anytime I do one of Franklin Covey's courses, Millennials at Work or Managing Millennials, there's always a millennial that says, I just came because I found the title offensive. And I wanted to see what you were going to do. And it wasn't so bad. It wasn't a millennial hate fest. But so many millennials have had to distance themselves from that because it is older generations have added so much baggage to the word that, based on 20% of people who really are the parody, that the rest of millennials have to figure out how they navigate through that. That's a legitimate issue that older generations need to step down on that. And thirdly, you'll have people say, this is a newer one, we just don't really run into generational differences that much as we manage internally or as we work with our clients or customers. And what's ironic is the group I heard that from, but I've heard it twice now, that's a group of newly promoted into middle management millennials, whereas the pilot group, they were older, or at least had 2 years experience rather than newly promoted in this middle management. And they had 1.5 pages of questions about what to do with different generations. And 90% of those were about millennials. And there was some frustration behind it. So the irony is that I think it comes with experience. And it's just, I don't have experience dealing with the frustrations of all generations yet. I just don't have a big enough data set so that I see a wide enough range of people. The fourth thing you hear is, my son said it. He goes, Dad, are we still talking about this? I'm 28. I got a kid. I got a house. Why are we talking about millennials? And then akin to that is something that he's noticed. He said, Dad, what I think happens is people don't realize that we're 37.
Yeah.
Millennials are 37.
Oh, yeah, I'm 35. I run a company. I have 5 team members. I met in a boardroom on the 27th floor of, a conference room overlooking Lake Michigan, in not what I'm wearing to record the podcast. Like, I know how to be what, a specific client wants me to be, right? And so I guess if I walked in and I did say millennial, I'm so millennialing, so millennial hard right now, that would be, probably still there would be some negative connotation there. And I guess what I've realized as somebody who's running a business is, I do have some freedom to choose what I'm going to do in life. And sometimes that means working with clients that are, not a perfect fit, but are a pretty good fit. And I just have to take it on the chin. And I've realized that also with baby boomer clients, quite frankly, baby boomer clients are more likely to scream and yell than I think millennials or Gen Xers are. And sometimes I'm just like, well, they're going to yell for a while. I'm not going to let this ruin my day. And once I let them yell and let them understand that I understand their frustration, they usually don't even want anything. They just wanted to yell for a little bit. And they came from you can define the years that generation was born. They came from a top-down corporate structure where you could yell. Millennial managers don't usually yell at millennial employees. At least I have never raised my voice. That's
fair. There's not nearly as much yelling. Yelling actually is one of the cardinal sins. And so I did a 6-part video series that are free on peopledrivenresults.com. You sign up and you can get access to it. And it's on how do you cut your generational turnover in half. And one of the 4 parts, one of the 4, 7-minute videos is about yelling. How do you cut your generational turnover in half? What the cardinal sin with the millennials is to yell. So they don't yell. It really is considered creepy behavior, out of line, out of control behavior. They have other ways of yelling. They can be quite impossible on social media. But in terms of in-person yelling or email yelling with people you're in an ongoing relationship with, that it's a cardinal sin. So I think that's exactly right. And let's come back to that. So to Seth's point and my son's point, I've got clothes. We're filming here in our TV room. I've got clothes upstairs that my wife thinks need to be thrown out and my children think are embarrassing. And it's because they really are from the early 2000s. And they're not from the 2000s. I just keep buying clothes that look like they came out in the early 2000s. And my 20-somethings are like, seriously, Dad, you look like, those tennis shoes look like a bus driver would wear them. But I know them and they're comfortable.
Actually, those are coming back. You know what? This is that rare exception where you won. Ugly, they're calling them old man tennis shoes, nothing personal, are coming back.
I turned 55 on Wednesday and my hair is completely gray. Old man is now really
okay. So I'm telling you, those are coming back in. As far as that goes, actually, if we're talking about generations in business, I'm just kind of rocking a flannel shirt and some Pumas today because I don't have any what I would call like serious meetings. I'm not asking anybody for money. I'm hanging out with you. I'm doing some other stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I will say, as someone who grew up on a farm, and if there was like a Pike County, Illinois Vogue, the September issue would always say, in this year, for the 38th year in a row, it's Levi's 527s, boots, and black T-shirts or flannel shirts.
Right.
And baseball caps, right? And so I always just figured, well, I'm staying loyal to where I'm from, and then I get married to somebody who went to college on a full fashion scholarship and is a stylist for a multi-platinum rock band. And I realized how much easier it is to own the room when you walk in looking very current as far as what like fashion trends are at right now, and very well put together. I totally once you attach money to something, I'm always much more likely to take it seriously. So once I learned that, I had a very different respect for clothing.
That makes sense. And part of that is you moving into the next stage of life, which said, I adjust to other people rather than ask them to adjust to me.
Yeah.
And that's just the next stage of life that it's kind of one of those things you learn. I was talking to a millennial just last week who said, I got some really great coaching that said one of the challenges I'm having with this particular type of person is I'm not adjusting my style to their style. He would define supportive work relationships, the kind of people he liked, as the people who would adjust to his style. Instead of, if I'm going to work with these kind of hard-charging people, I've got to adjust. He goes, why did I not catch on to this, that it's about adjusting? Because I think it's one of the things we all learn. We all learn to adjust. So that's basically what my son's saying is, hey, now I'm going to go get my shoes after this is over and show them to you and see if these truly count as old man shoes. Dad bods became fashionable, and I'm glad because I'm rocking one. And now if these shoes are fashionable, I am going to insist on being in my own version of Vogue. Anyway, but my son's like, Dad, I think that sometimes people your age think millennials are still 28. And they're 37, and that's really true because I don't update my clothing as fast as the people around me think I should. And we've all seen our grandparents with decorations from the 70s, and we're like, oh, how could they live like this? Well, they like it. That's the last time they paid attention to a lot of homes. And sometimes they don't have money, but a lot of times they're like, I actually like it like this. You're like, oh, as soon as you pass away and we get this house, we're going to have to redo the whole thing so that we can sell it. And so the same thing happens with generations. You don't realize, wait, like 30-something people are almost all millennials. We got to quit talking about millennials as if they're this young new thing. They're actually, to go back to your earlier question, because I've been palming this ace, waiting to bring us back to it. There actually are three, that's one of the trends, is there's 3 millennials. So people are like, hey, can you help us with the millennials? So churches will say to me, what do we do to reach millennials? Well, I don't know. What millennials are you talking about? Completely different what you do if you're talking about people who are 28, 30 and are emerging adults, are out of emerging adulthood into early adulthood versus 18 to 27, 28 in emerging adulthood versus people with 3 years work experience versus no work experience. That would be 3 different conversations, whether you're at work or in a religious setting. And so the fact that there are 3 different subgroups of millennials in any workplace or in any marketing scenario is really one of the most important things that come out of this.
So there's like elder, middle, and younger, something like that, right?
Yeah, we're talking, that's right. It's about work experience and life stage, even more than it's about millennial.
Okay. And so what that means as far as what our takeaway here is about companies not using the word millennial and how to manage these groups. So I'm an elder millennial.
Yeah.
And then there's the middle millennials, and then the younger millennials I think are easier to peg. They're closer to Gen Z. And ironically, actually kind of starting to swing back towards some like Gen X type of things. So politically, they're actually more conservative. because the mid millennials got all this like trigger warning, snowflake stuff going on, and younger millennials and Gen Z actually think that's kind of stupid. So we know that, and it looks like after everything being, creativity, art, chart your own course type of thing, everybody wants to be the next Zuckerberg. Now STEM careers, from what I can tell, for younger millennials and Gen Z are a really big deal. So they don't want to be Zuckerberg in a hoodie.
They're surging more.
They want to go and like be an engineer or a chemist or something like that, which is so weird to me because I hate science. With the exception of the science of killing deer and putting them in my freezer and making them into tasty meals. I do like that. I like that science. There's some biology there.
He does not hate science. He hates learning about science.
There we go.
Just to be technically correct for all of you STEM people. It's interesting that only 6% of women went into STEM fields in the millennials. And it's increasing. So STEM is a bigger deal. There's been a lot more emphasis on it, no doubt, with the younger generation. So there are some more conservative Generation X-like things that are happening as you hit the other dimension. And then lastly, what you hear people say is, I hear this one most, we really need you to help us understand millennials because our managers that's what our managers are asking for. Or we don't know how to market to millennials. Just got an email today saying, hey, would you be willing basically for free to join a consortium of experts who are helping a large packaged goods company figure out how to better understand and market to younger millennials? So that's one of the things people want to know most is how do we change our sales approach? How do we change our marketing approach? But then they say, hey, but we can't do a session, we can't do a workshop, we can't have a course on millennials because it would be offensive to people. So can you cover all the generations, but spend 80% of your time on millennials because that's what we're puzzled by? So that's probably the most common request I get is, please talk about millennials, but we need to do it within all generations. So I bet you 70% of the business I get is because the sticking points covers all the generations, not just one, but they really want to emphasize one and even now begin to talk about what's going on with this next generation after all. So those really are the 5 categories. What do we do with it all? 3 takeaways. Number 1 is there really are 3 different kinds of millennials. Number 2, it really is about life stage and work experience. Number 3, 20% of the millennials truly live out the memes and the stereotypes, and the rest of them are somewhere along the continuum in life experience of moving out of freedom into settled down. Basically, what some of us old dogs are saying is, I like you settled down. I like you in early adulthood, not in emerging adulthood. And because emerging adulthood is a new life stage, which has been extended, and we've never seen it before this long, older generations are like, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with these young people? And what's wrong is they got more freedom than older generations had. And business leaders, managers, parents don't like freedom because freedom looks irresponsible or freedom looks like you can do it. I need to ask some questions about when I'm going to have time off. Older generations like, what are you asking questions about time off for in your first half hour of an interview? Because it's one of the 3 or 4 things I value most at this stage in my life. Okay. But that didn't make any sense to older generations. So part of it is they embed in the name millennial what is actually characteristics of a life stage that they don't get, they don't understand.
So Gen Xers and baby boomers, when they were applying for a job at 23, to maybe a lesser extent, but it was still there. They were valuing time off, freedom, flexibility. Maybe not flexibility as much because flexibility of the workplace has changed so drastically, right?
We got to do an episode on that. What does work-life balance mean today? Because having worked for Franklin Covey for 25 years and taught time management to thousands of people, the work-life balance is a constant theme, and it was huge. It's one of the things that put Stephen Covey on the map with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and it has molted significant. It has molted about 4 different times. Molted, that would be a scientific term for what birds do at different seasons of their life. That would be molted.
Okay, so that's an entire different episode. Can I close on a note too?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring science back into it for you.
Yes, so I would say if we're talking about connecting with generations, and we're talking about like the nerdy shoes and stuff like that. As an elder millennial, and we're about to be
okay. So you couldn't just let the science jab go. You had to take another clothing jab, didn't you?
So we're about to be at a point where Gen Z is getting into the workforce in about 4 years, right? And so I guess I can't speak to that, but as a millennial, speaking for all three versions of millennials, millennials really, as a generation, you've said, stay closer to home, are much closer to their parents, are less likely to be brought up in divorced homes, latchkey kids that detached from their
same
family
likelihood
of origin.
in divorced homes, but less latchkey kids, more social services, much more support.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say that, if you're an older manager, taking an interest in the stuff that your millennial employees like goes a really long way, because they really probably do want to be, have a great relationship with you and want to find some stuff to have rapport with you about. And I look at myself as somebody who will still be playing video games when I'm 85, like absolutely plan on it. And so what's funny as a 35-year-old running a company, a lot of times younger millennials are kind of surprised at how much I'm up on their stuff. And it's just because I care about culture. I care about what people think about. I care about what makes people tick and what's influencing our society. And they're like, oh, well, like I'm in college and you're like in your, your mid 30s in career, but like you get it. And man, there's something really powerful about when you get something that somebody cares about, even if you don't have a super deep knowledge of it, or even if you don't, follow it to the nth degree. Like football is by far the sport that lags the most as far as me paying attention to it, because traditionally the St. Louis Cardinals have always been in the playoffs, and so I'm busy in the fall watching baseball. Maybe not so true in last year or this year, but just the fact that like football is one of those topics I know I need to know about because people like it, and I should be able to talk about it with them. And so having a breadth of knowledge and having genuine empathy and connecting with people where they're at on what they like always works in business. And you can do that with your millennial employees with just a little bit extra work.
That's a touchdown right there. That's a touchdown. What they don't want is for you to come in with all the assumptions, the negative assumptions about what millennials are like. That's what they don't want. What they do want is for you to go out of your way to get curious. That's kind of, if you've heard us talk before, you remember that curious is one of my major words. If we can be curious, we can have great relationships with people of different generations.
Can I drop one more, like, hopefully, like, piece of gold here, and then we'll wrap up? So I think that
gold, then a mic drop.
Okay, we're just gonna drop the mic.
There you
go. When you said be curious, when I'm thinking about like the millennial memes and stuff like that, which by the way, if you have an employee who is a meme, fire them. Like if they're that close to the meme, fire them. They're not going to get better. Do it right. Pause the video.
Why did I not think of saying it this way? I am now quoting you, and then